Hey, what's up everybody, Prime22 here, bringing you another episode of the Transformers Lore Podcast. The Transformers Lore Podcast is the thing that I do with the stuff. The Transformers Lore Podcast is the audio version of Transformers Lore, because the things I cover here do not have any visual elements to them. So, like in this case, we have a text story. And, today we're going to be talking about microaggressions, another story in the Beast Wars Uprising universe. And before we get into this, I'd like to preface that I did a little research after the Be in the City episode, and yeah, the butt did not malfunction because of the Allspark key. It just sort of did that. For those of you who don't know, you might want to watch the previous episode of the Transformers Lore Podcast if that made no sense to you at all. But yes, today we're going to continue our Beast Wars Uprising thing, and this is a special event because I've started recording this just after I finished reading it, so it's fresh in my mind. And so yeah, universe is going to be Primax 209.0 Gamma, and yeah, we get a lot of little juicy bits of information in this chapter. But first, I want to talk about the Cataclysm. So we all know Primax 984.0 Gamma. That is the Marvel US Transformers comic universe. Now, for those of you who know the Marvel universe, you know that there's a lot of sequels to it. You have Generation 2, you have the Classics verse, you have Another Time and Place, you have Regeneration 1. But yeah, originally Primax 1291.0 Zeta was a sort of sequel, a subsequent timeline to Primax 94.0 Gamma, and that would be the universe of Another Time and Place. However, the Classics verse, Primax 209.0 Gamma, Primax 207.0 Epsilon, came into existence. And when it did so, Primax 1291.0 Zeta sort of died, and in addition to that, an event called the Cataclysm began in Gargant 984.0 Alpha. Gargant 984.0 Alpha is the universe of the GoBots cartoon. And for some reason, when Primax 207.0 Epsilon came into being, it began to overwrite Gargant 984.0 Alpha. And this led to something called the Cataclysm, where that universe began to die. So the GoBots sort of all began to just go scattered throughout the multiverse. And a good bit of GoBots came over to Primax 209.0 Gamma. In the Beast Wars Uprising universe. And our story starts with some GoBots, specifically the Monster Renegades, Pincher and Blades. And they're led by another one called Hornet. But anyway, they're huddling under the Neurospan Bridge. The Renegades are sort of posing as Predacons to try to, assimilate into society because, you aren't going to fit in going, hey, we're GoBots, you guys never heard of us. But they're there, they're huddling under a bridge, there's acid rain, they're like, God, Cybertron's terrible. But then, a certain Maximal shows up, and a deal goes down. The Renegades, posing as Predacons, give this Maximal the G virus, and in return, the Maximal gives them information about everything the Resistance knows about the Human Confederacy. So, putting vague things aside, the Maximal is Grimlock, and we're going to get into why Grimlock is a Maximal later on. But he's getting this mysterious thing called the G-Virus from them, and in turn gives the Renegades everything the Resistance knows about the Human Confederation. And there's in this text story, you have to decode it, but we get a lot of information on what's going on with humanity and the Human Confederation in this universe. So I just have a list here. First, humanity has stopped using the BCE-CE system, the before Common Era system, and now they use BA, before the Ark, and SCA, Stellar Cycle of the Ark. And basically everything before 1984 is BA, 1984 and beyond is SCA. In one SCA, humanity develops their first AI, and this timeline sort of goes very closely with the Primax 785.06 Alpha timeline. But this is where Torque came into existence. They landed on Mars in 8 SCA, made the first warp gate with the help of the Autobots in 13 SCA, and this is sort of where when the trigger was made back in Primax 785.06 Alpha, so, there's a little correlation there. AI has become commonplace by 30 SCA, and they have neural interfaces by 33 SCA. In 19 SCA is when the Earth Defense Command was founded, and the Earth Defense Command is actually formed out of the G.I. Joe Star Brigade. In 33 SCA is when the Earth Defense Command declared all of human space off limits to Transformers because there was an attack on a human colony called New Earth. And then in 39 SCA, that's when the human singularity happened, when humanity became more advanced than the Transformers. In 39 SCA, Decepticons launched an attack on the planet Shanghai, and basically they did so sneaking in on an Autobot ship, and because of that, in 42 SCA, the planet Tamil Dunia needed help, and an Autobot shuttle, an actual Autobot shuttle called the Star Arrow, approaches the planet. And because of what happened at Shanghai, the Human Confederacy just shot down the Star Arrow. So Autobot EDC relations is at a low. In 45 SCA is when the Human Confederacy was formed. The Earth Defense Command becomes known as the Confederated Terran Colonial Fleet. Now remember when we talked about what happened on Nebulos? Well, that was 47 SCA, and it's called the Scouring of Nebulos. And because of the Nebulos, the Human Confederacy forces Transformers to stay on Cybertron. We learned that they only allowed to have 9 colony worlds. And in 49 SCA, Galvatron is like, yeah, I'm going to listen to what humans are going to say, sure. And then launches a huge invasion of Earth space. But because the humans are so technologically advanced, they just utterly wipe out Galvatron and his Decepticons. And because of that, humanity launches attacks. Well, no, they don't. They say Cybertron can only have 4 colonies. They give a 10-day period for Cybertronians and the 5 colonies they're going to lose. They give them a 10-day period to leave, and after 10 days, they completely sterilize the planet. Or the planets. So yeah, again, things aren't going so well for Cybertronian space exploration. In 70 SCA is when humanity has pretty much become immortal. They don't die naturally anymore. There are 3 types of humans: biologicals, circuitry enhanced, and psychals. And by the time of 80 to 90 SCA, natural humans are sort of like second-class citizens. But being immortal just isn't enough, because in 130 SCA, they begin the Eutychus Project, which is the project to bring back to life every single human being that's ever died, with some exceptions. Obviously, they might not think it's okay to bring back terrible criminals like Hitler, or the Witwickies, because the Witwickies worked with the Autobots, which makes them terrible criminals in human society. So yeah, to bring back to life every dead human except for, the most heinous of criminals. So that's all the information we gain on the Human Confederacy. Our story then jumps to Hot Rod, and we learn more about what Hot Rod's up to during this time. Hot Rod is a Micromaster and is in charge of, a Micromaster unit. We get some narration from him talking about how he downsized to a Micromaster because he couldn't think of living without, walking, running, or transforming. He's Hot Rod after all. But he even downsized at the cost of becoming lower in the social status. Because, natural builders that are too old, too decrepit, too low on fuel to actually move are still considered the top class of society. He's an officer in the Micromaster forces, and he's in charge of different Autobots, Decepticons, what have you. And he feels that it's weird that he's commanding Decepticons, but some of his finest troops under his command were Decepticons. We learn more about how, not all, but a lot of Micromasters that were killed during the Resistance attack on Fortress Maximus. We learn how those Micromasters were, most of them were once under Hot Rod's command at some point or another. We also learn that the Beast Wars Uprising version of Crumple Zone from Transformers Cybertron is a Micromaster that died in the raid on Fortress Maximus. Hot Rod also set a precedent for some builders going down to Micromaster size. The Aerialbots, the Protectobots, and Constructicons all followed Hot Rod's example. But yeah. Now, Hot Rod is given full rations, and this is rare because you don't really get full rations in Cybertronian society, so it's like, okay, maybe we have a mission. He goes to his headquarters, which is called the Star Convoy, because of course it is, and in the city of Micropolis, and he meets with his unit and learns that the night before, the Forever Vaults were looted, and the G-Virus was stolen. So basically, a little background on this: the Renegades, the monster GoBots, launched an attack on the Forever Vaults and seized the G-Virus, there was one survivor who was a guard there, and that was Copter. And Copter's a GoBot. But when they saw Copter, they weren't sure whether this Copter was the Copter they knew or the Copter of that universe, so they let him live. And the Copter is a Beast Wars Uprising Copter and not the GoBots Copter, but they allowed Copter to live. So Copter was able to give his statement, but he's still hospitalized. And we'll get to Copter later on. But anyway, Hot Rod's like, okay, do we have to get it back? And they're like, yeah, and like we know that it's under the control of a certain resistance group now because their commander, Grimlock, put out a bounty for it. And that sort of sets up the scene where what we saw at the beginning with Grimlock getting the G-Virus from the Renegades. And so Hot Rod's like, oh crap, it's Grimlock, and he really doesn't like Grimlock. But yeah. So we learn more about sort of the relationship between Hot Rod and Grimlock. Apparently Grimlock was upset with how the builders were running Cybertron, so he illegally transplanted his spark into a maximal protoform, and then tried to smuggle a bomb into the builder assembly. So he got kicked out, and now he's part of the Resistance. Actually, one of the leaders of the Resistance, at least of his own cell. And Grimlock wanted to change the system immediately, while Hot Rod wanted to change the system from the inside over time. And that's why we see Hot Rod sort of working with the builders, even though he is a builder, but still feeling like the good old same Hot Rod. Anyway, the event that's all big in the news is that the first games since the Resistance started is about to happen again. And basically Rat-Bat wants to tell the populace that everything's fine, we aren't falling apart, see, we still have the games. And I'll personally watch the games myself and be its overseer. Of course, the gladiators aren't your traditional gladiators, they're captured Resistance prisoners. But yeah, and Hot Rod knows that this would enrage Grimlock and that he would want to try to free the prisoners, so he suspects that Grimlock's going to launch an attack on the facility. And indeed, Grimlock's unit, and there's a whole, all these characters are named using Grimlock's unit, but I won't bother going into every single member of the unit. But they infiltrate the Tesserus Arena to, free prisoners and launch the G-Virus. But Hot Rod finds them with his unit and they launch a surprise attack. Hot Rod and Grimlock have this big fight that goes on with them talking over different ideological differences. Hot Rod's like, Grimlock, you're being no better than Megatron launching an attack on society in order to get your views. And then Grimlock's like, you're the one who's not following any Autobot ideas anymore, working with these builders. But the battle goes on, and eventually both Grimlock and Hot Rod are terribly damaged. But they finally make it to the surface, and Snapper, one of Grimlock's I don't remember if he's a Maximal or a Predacon, but one of his soldiers under his command. Snapper shows up, drags the very heavily wounded Hot Rod off of Grimlock, and Grimlock's like, here, take this G-Virus. I think it's in a gun. Take this G-Virus gun and start shooting it into the crowd. Hit as many people as you can with the G-Virus. So Spanner takes the gun, points at the crowd, and then Hot Rod's like, no, Spanner, don't do that. Think about that. Has Grimlock told you what that virus does? And Spanner's like, boss, what does this virus do? And Grimlock's like, we don't have time for this, just shoot it into the crowd. And then basically Hot Rod gives him the breadcrumbs for Spanner to piece everything together. And he learns that the G-Virus is, in a way, Galvatron. And that apparently, after Galvatron's death, Cybertronian scientists took him apart and basically wanted to learn what it was Unicron did to Megatron in the first place to turn him into Galvatron. And as a result, they created the G-Virus. And the G-Virus essentially replicates that process that we see in Transformers the movie with all the, all the lines and stuff when Megatron becomes Galvatron. It replicates that process and creates Galvatrons. And it's fueled by Dark Energon. And so Hot Rod's like, if you shoot that gun, we're going to have 20, 30 more Galvatrons out there. And then Grimlock's like, yeah, I wanted to reformat 20,000 builders so we can send a message. Don't mess with the Resistance. And Snapper's just horrified. You wanted to unleash Galvatron on Cybertronian society again? And then he's just like, no. And then he destroys the gun. And Grimlock gets pissed at him and says that the Resistance won't stop until Spanner's dead. So Spanner, gets taken prisoner, but Hot Rod promises to watch over him. So he essentially defects. So this story didn't really give a very good light to the Resistance, now did it? It was much more of a pro-builder story than anything else. But there's an epilogue. In the hospital, Copter just thinks about events that had happened. If you remember at the end of Broken Windshields, Eject's like talking about using something to create, the Galva contingency to create a clone of Lyle Convoy. And Eject visited him before the raid on his lab happened, on the Forever Vaults happened, I guess, to learn more about the G-Virus, and Copter thinks that's how the Resistance learned about the G-Virus. And then, you had the attack, now he's there hospitalized. But then it turns out that during the heist, he ended up being exposed to the G-Virus, and laying there in his hospital bed, Copter goes through a full transformation, and then he becomes Galvatron. And then Galvatron just gets up, kills one of the Micromaster nurses watching over him, and just leaves. He just goes out into Cybertronian society. So there's a loose Galvatron out there. And, to make it all work, the body, he looks a lot more like the Beast Wars Neo Galvatron than G1 Galvatron. But personality-wise, he's G1 Galvatron. Just because this is a Beast Wars story, we had to make him look like the Beast Wars Galvatron. But yeah. So yeah, that covers the story of microaggressions. We get a lot more history of humanity. We get a lot more perspective of those who were alive during the Great War, and we learn a lot more about and create another Galvatron. So there's that. So yeah, next week we'll be taking a look at another Beast Wars Uprising story, which his name escapes me right now. But yeah, thank you guys so much for listening. Transformers Lore on Monday. Primus Plays on Friday. More Transformers Lore podcast on Wednesday. Subscribe if you like, if you have not already. Follow me on social media for updates. Join the Discord to join the community. Follow the Primus Prime 22 subreddit. No, you don't say follow for a subreddit. Subscribe to the Primus Prime 22 subreddit for further discussion on Transformers lore. And yeah, have a good day, ladies and gentlemen.